welcome to a special Halloween Man 20th anniversary episode of the Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we look at Darkman, otherwise known as Sam Raimi's Darkman. Joining me from Austin, Texas, is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist from the bands Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist from the band Rise from Fire. Also in Austin, Jamie Bahr is a musician, activist, and educator. She's the lead singer and upright bassist for Austin's premier all-female rock and roll band, Cakes, and the executive director of Girls Rock Austin. And finally, the man, the myth, the legend, the professor, David Bowles is an award-winning author and translator from South Texas, where he teaches at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. He has 24 books to his name, and he'll soon be adding BIPOC futurist space opera, The D'Angelo Chronicles, coming in 2021 from Castlebridge Media. And I am filling in for Jason Henderson tonight. I am your host, Drew Ewards, writer and creator of the long-running, and as of this month, 20 years of long-running underground comic Halloween Man, currently published by Comixology. So, which is why we are here tonight talking about Darkman. So I'll just get right into it. Darkman is a 1990 American superhero action film directed and co-written by Sam Raimi with his brother Ivan Raimi. It is based off of a short story that Raimi wrote to pay homage to Universal's horror films from the 1930s, and this was actually released by Universal, as well as pulp heroes like The Shadow and The Phantom. The movie stars Liam Neeson, way before he was the incomparable Liam Neeson on Key and Peele, or way even before he was canceled on Twitter, as Peyton Westlake, a scientist who is brutally attacked, disfigured, left for dead by a ruthless mobster, Robert Durant, played by the incomparable Larry Drake, after his girlfriend, Kearney, also the amazing Frances McDormand, runs afoul of a corporate real estate developer, which we will get more into later, I'm sure. After a failed treatment to cure him of his burn injuries, Westlake develops superhuman abilities, which also has the unintended side effect of rendering him mentally unstable and borderline psychotic. Consumed with vengeance, decides to hunt down the men responsible for his disfigurement, and that is all pulled from Wikipedia. So I'm going to go with our guests tonight, because I have assembled a amazing team of our regular guest stars to help Tony and I tonight. So we're going to go Jamie, David, Tony, then myself. Jamie, give us your opening thoughts. Darkman.
Well, I actually had never seen this movie until I met you, Drew. I had never heard of it before, and I thought I had seen every Liam Neeson movie. But lo and behold, I had never seen Darkman, and the first time I watched it, I really didn't know what to make of it. But I love every character, and I think the effects were really kind of over the top, but in a good way. Some of it's really I don't know. I find it to the point where it's haunting, where I find Liam Neeson's face bubbles that part haunts me now. I think upon this rewatching of it, I definitely got a lot more out of it, and found it a lot more enjoyable. Was able to find the funny quirks about it, as opposed to just seeing it as this really dark storyline about vengeance and cruelty to others. So yeah.
Well, that's a good start. Although but it sounds like before we started recording, David, you might have a bit of a different opinion than Jamie. Opening thoughts, Darkman, have at it.
So I saw this movie for the first time back in 1990. It was a year after Tim Burton's Batman had come out, and of course this has also got an interesting soundtrack from Danny Elfman, and felt like it was trying to do a lot of the same things, but just in a rated R kind of way. But I haven't seen the movie again in the past 30 years because I didn't particularly like it when I first saw it. And I just watched it like literally just, I finished watching it like an hour ago, and I still do not like the movie. I mean, I like bits and pieces of it. I like Dartman, the character. I like the laboratory sets. I like all the business of his, following people around and taking photos and putting on those disguises. But nearly everything else about the film, from the acting to the script, the really cheesy dialogue, the kind of like rambling, incoherent plot that feels like just a bunch of scenes kind of like loosely connected to each other, to like just the complete lack of logic in the abilities of Dartman, how they change from one part of the movie to the other, and there's just a lot of really, really cringeworthy things about it. And I mean, I understand that part of it is that Raimi was trying to evoke a certain type of film and try to make something comic booky. And I tried when I was rewatching it to think about what it was like to be 1920, and this was like the kind of comic book films that people were making. They were still like way too tongue in cheek for my taste, way too schlocky, and it's really hard for me even to go back and watch the original Batman because it's so schlocky. But this one is like particularly egregious in ways that I'll get into as we go. I had to like pause the movie like 5 times and get up and do something else because I just couldn't sit through the entire thing. It was just so irritating. I was like having like my cat was sitting on my lap, and I was just having a conversation with my cat about how irritated I was by nearly everything in the movie. Even Frances McDormand's acting, I was like, what the hell? You're like one of the greatest actresses on the planet, and you're like phoning it in. This is really sad. But anyway, we'll get into it more. But yes, definitely my verdict is C-, D+, something like that. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's good to have dissent. I am a big believer in it. That being said, I know Tony feels differently than you. So, Tony, opening thoughts, Darkman.
Yeah, I don't mind any of the schlockiness. I'm completely fine with how ridiculous in so many ways this movie is. But also I was surprised because this is a 1990 movie, but there's a run of movies in 1990 that still kind of feel like 87 or 86. And I think this is one of them. I watched another one, Blind Fury with Rutger Hauer, which doesn't feel like 1990. And I think a lot of it's like some of like the way they introduce the villains has that kind of 80s feel. And then this is pure Raimi. Yeah, go ahead.
That time though. I mean, like it basically is still the 80s. It's not right. Somebody is like, oh, it's 1990. Now we have to change everything. And it's like, media and movies especially, like it takes a while to get the memo and actually culture to evolve to create something different. So of course it's going to look like that.
Well, it's the feel of it though, what I'm keying off of, because there's certain movies that feel like, okay, yes, this is the turn of the decade, but this one's still very firmly rooted in all of that. And you're totally correct, but it doesn't turn on a dime. But there are other movies starting in 90 and kind of moving where you go, okay, this is kind of what sets the tone for those. But this firmly feels like a few years back in many, many good ways, in my opinion. I really thought that the tech, especially now that we have like 3D printers, like some tech is woefully dated and terrible, and what they were trying to evoke that eventually kind of became some of what we have now, I thought would have been more dated and actually kind of fits in, which is weird to me considering how old the film is now. I get kind of where you're coming from, David. Like I could see that. But for me, all of it just still works. I don't know. I don't know if that says something about myself and how much I've grown or not. That's possible.
It also how much, just as a team, how much schlocky nonsense y'all watch. I get to like just listen to the podcast and avoid watching like 3/4 of the film that you guys talk about, But you watch enough of it, you I guess you acquire a taste for it, and it's just like for somebody who's like just a little bit more about like more straight up serious adventure and horror and stuff like that, things that have like a more realistic tone. It's just jarring, and like and then they're like this specific like actual thing like acting, like it's just poorly acted by so many people, except I think for in the beginning scenes we'll get into it, but the beginning scenes with Liam Neeson are just like goofy as hell, but like once the accident happens, like he settles into that role and does a really good job, I think. But anyway.
Sure. I think also part of the acting, should let Drew have his say, but Raimi definitely can direct actors and be very successful at that. I think part of it you may be keying off of, and I don't need to make any apologies for it, but I am guessing that he was still trying to evoke that shadow, what he thought of as what was the core elements of something like The Shadow, The Phantom, serials, because serials don't have the best, what we now think of as the best acting, right? Like, and I watch a ton of serials now that they're all streaming because I just like that hokey craziness, Commander Cody, Flash Gordon stuff. I still get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Or
if I may,
Captain Marvel, Superman, where he's throwing, Captain Marvel, where he's throwing a machine gun to kill people. So I don't know. Anyway, go. It's Drew's turn to talk about the movie, though.
If I may, then first of all, I don't consider this movie to be schlock. This movie is a melodrama, and we will get into what I think the difference is there. But I do think it's fair to call this movie melodramatic. It's definitely made on a scale. And actually, you're talking to somebody, point of fact, who prefers the Tim Burton Batman movies over the Christopher Nolan movies, because I feel like there's something cheesy about the Nolan movies because they have taken an operatic character and kind of dumbed him down to fit into our world. So, like, I think that there's something to be said about the balance of this and why it's kind of hard get super heroic characters right on screen, because it's a very it's a combustible element. It's hard to do exactly right, which is why I think people will argue so passionately about it. But as far as my own relationship to this movie and why we are actually even talking about doing this movie tonight, as I mentioned during the opening credits, so to speak, this is the 20th anniversary of Halloween Man, and this character, Darkman, is one of the building blocks of the character of Halloween Man that I very seldomly talk about, and yet I don't think the character, often people will say, oh, this character looks like the Phantom of the Opera, this character looks like Two-Face, this character looks like the Hex. No, you can trace the way Halloween Man looks right back to Darkman. And the idea that you have this character who is both heroic and sinister at the same time, and this idea that it is bad things happening to bad people, which is why I think this movie has an appeal, and I'm sure we will get more into that. But for my part, I unabashedly love this movie. This is probably my favorite Sam Raimi movie. It would be a toss-up between this and Evil Dead 2, but like I think this one is very rewatchable, and I'm gonna have to disagree with the professor again. I even think that the acting is that bad. I think Larry Drake is incredibly good as a kind of admittedly sort of throwback 1930s mobster character, but he's fun to watch in his way. So, there's criticisms that you have lobbed, David, that I agree with. And like I said, we get into, but in all, I love Darkman, and I am glad to be talking about it tonight. So I don't think that there is going to be any benefit through this movie's plot in a linear fashion. But before we talk about Darkman and the characters and any of this, I did want to get something right out of the bat, and I think that David will probably have a lot to say about this. The real estate subplot of this, like the whole engine that gets this whole thing revving up, is that there is a real estate developer that is teamed up with a bunch of gangsters to do something. And I've seen this movie dozens of times, and there's a memorandum that they're trying to get. I still don't think I fully get what's going on there. And do I even care, or does it even matter?
Well, it matters. It matters to me. Go ahead.
I mean, you don't have to care, but I mean, in reality, the villain nowadays, we would have it like, look, the villain has this. He's flawed in this way that he wants the best things, because what's really going on is there's shady dealings in order to get this cool development, and why wouldn't anybody want this development? Because it's going to make everything better and cooler and more towards the future. That's the reality of what he's trying to do, right? Like, anybody who doesn't have this vision of my cool buildings that I'm going to gentrify everything and push the poor out and everything he's going to do, he views it as okay. Of course, he's very typically slimy 80s, corporate guy. And then we're supposed to feel like maybe he's okay once there's a love interest later, once Liam Neeson is out of the way. But yeah, it becomes more nonsensical the more you kind of get into it. But the simplest is, these are the things I have to do in order to get my cool future thing. I mean, it's like RoboCop, where, we have to do this stuff to push out the poor to get the land, etc.
So you're saying, if I'm following this, you were, and I'm going to kick this over to both Jamie and David, because they are two of the wokest people I know. You were saying that Darkman is potentially a movie about gentrification. Now, I'm putting a pin on that for you, Tony. Jamie, then David, what do you think about that idea?
Well, the fact that our villain is a real estate mogul, if this was like modern day, he'd be a very kind of Trumpian type guy, figure. He seems like not only is he like sadistic, but he just, he wants to be hands-on. He wants to be right in there, up on the helicopter and, cutting people's fingers off and doing all that. So, I mean, there's that aspect of things that it goes back to that comic book feel. But if you do think about it, I mean, it is, I think it very much is about gentrification. And I feel like that memorandum, is probably something along those lines, where it's probably protecting some aspect of the community, whether it's like, it could be, there's a salamander that's endangered and we can't build in this area, or, there's a certain amount of public housing that has to be in this area. If it's something that they are all thinking like, oh, well, if no one sees this memo, I guess memorandum, but every time I think about it, I immediately think of Office Space. Like, did you get the memo? Did you get the memo? And also, it also bothered me how much, like, they just have coffee, like, how everyone knows that it's this one memo isn't by what it says, but the coffee cup ring that's on it. I don't know. I was like, that's very unprofessional. But yeah, going back to the gentrification aspect, there's not a lot of people of color in this movie for it being, LA. There's only a couple where they show in the gang scenes, but they don't really show a lot of people in general. Like, even where Liam Neeson has his lab is like over, I think, in like a Chinese food restaurant or something along those lines, or a Chinese food warehouse, So I mean, it doesn't show too much of that. Although, you open and there's that whole scene with the gangsters. I mean, there's that aspect of things that I do feel like, now that's all that stuff in only having, people of color be, the bad guys, not really really but
not a good look.
Yeah, not so much.
Okay.
But it was.
I can get with that.
It was a different time.
David, you got any thoughts that way?
Yeah, well, I mean, if Sam and Ivan intended originally for this to be, a meditation on gentrification, which I doubt, it was probably, you know, a victim of the studio interference that made this movie into the tonal mess that it is. Because I mean, the script went through like 12 different revisions. The studios were not happy with what they saw. That there was the rough cut that the director did was shown, and people were laughing at the wrong place, and they made them cut huge swaths of the film out. And I think that really hampers our understanding of the villain's motivation and plot, despite his, you know, mustache twirling, description of his plan at the very end. And also, I think it really hampers the character development of the principals. Like, I really wanted to feel more for Peyton and the things that he's going through, but Peyton is just like a cipher. He's just like this weird scientist at the beginning who says things like, you know, what is it? What is it? What is it about the dark? And I yelled at the screen, the fact that there's no fucking light, you moron. That's what it's so annoying. Like, again and again, like these. And so, like, because there's no development and all we get are like little like quips spattered throughout instead of like actual character interaction and like seeing more in depth the relationship between Julie and Peyton in the beginning, rather than just like a couple of cute little scenes and boom, like this. It's just the movie. What happens is it's only, you know, an hour and a half long, but it feels like 4 hours because the lack of like substantive character development that's needed for you to feel this guy's journey into darkness, and like, you know, his spiraling from being like this sweet scientist who's in love with this girl and wants to marry her. And is
like
her
his proposal?
His proposal on the street.
I thought, how romantic! Side of the road, Julia, you're making my grandma know I'm a sinner and that we're having sex. So we should get married. I love you.
I mean, but in other words, like, he's like an overly sweet guy, and it's a smart idea, and I know that a lot of the early revisions, Raimi says, were about like trying to, you know, depict that journey into darkness and to have the unraveling of a good man and have him turn into a monster who's willing to do monstrous things to get revenge. I wanted to see that movie, but instead I got like a 7-year-old boy's playing around with his toys and now the helicopter and now the bazooka and boom, and it's just like, oh no, I'm just down for that kind of film. I wasn't when I was 20, and I'm not 50 either.
Anyway. Jamie?
I said I liked that about it. I thought that was very much the feel of it. That was like,
hey, not everybody likes K-dramas.
An 8-year-old boy's like fantasy. Like, when I was a little girl, my sister and I would play with our Barbies, and we had a G.I. Joe Ken, or not G.I. Joe Ken, we had a Ken doll and G.I. Joe, but at one point we lost Ken for a while, and, you know, so Barbie and G.I. Joe got together, and then, you know, kids lose things. We lost Joe, and then we found him, and like the dog had gotten a hold of him, so he'd like lost a leg, and we buried him in the backyard. We had this whole thing where he died in Nam serving our country, and who's going to console Barbie now? It was so ridiculous and like as Drew said, melodramatic, as, you know, only like children will often write. And not in a bad way, that it's just so, you know, ridiculous and over the top.
R-rated film written by children that has like graphic violence and F-bombs and stuff like that. I don't know. This is not my cup of tea.
So I don't know that I would actually call it. I want to talk about Darkman, the character Darkman, in more in depth here in a second. But I want to respond to something. I don't know that I would actually, especially compared to Raimi's other films, I don't know that I would actually call this movie graphically violent. There's grotesque stuff in it, but other than like him breaking the guy's finger, a lot of the violence ends up happening like I think of like when I was younger, when I first saw this movie, and there's the scene where he's holding Ted Raimi, one of the gangsters, out of a storm drain or a sewer drain, and there's cars whizzing around him, and I remember thinking that scene was terrifying when I was a kid, and I was so sure that you saw his head get run over. But they cut away. Like, when you think about what Raimi was known for at this time, which is the Evil Dead movies. I'm not going to say it's not a violent movie, but I think the violence it's not. I don't know that I would call it more or less grotesque than you brought up Tim Burton's Batman, which has some grotesque in it too. But
it's cartoonish.
There is a cartoonishness about it, yeah.
So, like very Wile E. Coyote, like blowing himself up and or setting himself on fire, or well, I guess I don't know, but all of those things, and even like the way that how they try to kill Liam Neeson's character, like or Peyton, I should say, it's just so ridiculous. I mean, first they're like beating him up, then they're like throwing stuff on him and crushing him, then they're like stab him with needles, and then trying to and they all pick him up like they're gonna, what's that called, like a log jam, and try to drown him in boiling like chemicals, and just all of that. Just, it's so, like I said, very cartoonish, even though it's totally messed up. And his body, like the things that I feel like are the most violent is that scene, and where like you're seeing the after effects, like his body, like he looks so much, and I feel like he's doing a pretty good job of looking like he's in horrible pain, writhing around, and like, he's like clawing through broken glass, and you're just, I don't know. All of that stuff is, I feel like it's cringeworthy in that, like, oh God, like, we've all stepped on a piece of glass before. Imagine, having your chemically burned body being dragged through it, and like, it's just, I'm rooting for him, and he's just, doomed. And that's, I think, a lot of it why it seems, again, so dark.
Well, two things. A, Jamie, your description of your Barbie melodrama and antics, I think actually proves I think that's probably what David was seeing. Like, you telling that tale, I picture David going, yeah, that's this movie. That sounds like what I watched was exactly. All of that made up. And as you described, I was like, just picturing David going, yeah, that sounds exactly how this movie was made, in my opinion. It proved the point.
It's pretty funny because we had buried him in the backyard, G.I. Joe, and I don't know, probably a good 15, 20 years later, my parents decided to put a pool in the backyard, and we're digging in the backyard, and they found a half-eaten Reebok shoebox that had Joe on it, and like half of his head had been like chewed up by, it looked like some sort of wild animal, and still missing his leg, but like I got a picture of him, and it was scary.
Well, my mom sent me, they just found a doll's head that was my sister's today. It's buried under a tree. And my mom goes, oh, it feels very Halloween. What should we do with it? And I said, well, that sounds like whatever. It depends on what horror movie you're in. Are you in the movie where you need to bury it again because that relieves the curse? Are you in the movie where you need to uncurse that thing? I said, or C, you just start hiding that doll head around my sister's place, and you keep hiding it.
God, that'd be horrible. That would freak me out terribly.
Well, yeah. Speaking of things that have been melted, chewed on, burnt, and generally disfigured by the world, I would like to take a moment to talk about Darkman, not the film, but the actual character. And, you were just talking about the scene where the gang basically mutilates him and sets his lab on fire, and he's blown up, falls into the bay, and the world thinks him dead. And conveniently, he is picked up by a local hospital mad scientist, and, which I played by, and I'm blanking on the actress's name, but played by the nurse from American Werewolf in London. And
well, she's kinky.
Yeah, right. But good to know that she did give up her medical career. But
and good for them for having a woman lead doctor.
Yeah, that's true. But okay, so she's apparently performing experiments on homeless people. Who and this is what he has severed the nerves in his body that are his pain receptors. And she's also amped up his adrenaline, giving him superhuman strength, which also will apparently give him bouts of mania. On paper, how did this seem like a good... I understand she is... what she, even though she never like cackles or does any of the typical mad scientist things, how on paper did this seem like this was... I mean, it worked out well for Peyton because it's what allows him to get his revenge. But
Drew, I just real quick, she one quick like correction. What she said was, I've severed his whatever that conducts pain and through his nerves, and in the absence of physical feelings, his emotions are going to become his refuge. Right. And what happens to these people is, because of that, their emotions grow stronger, and there's nothing stopping their adrenaline from flowing. So it's not like it's all she did was sever the nerves. The adrenaline thing is a part of
great.
This.
You are correct. Yeah. Which is we can all agree, no matter how we got to this point, you have a superhumanly strong guy that can't feel pain who has post-traumatic stress disorder and violent bouts of mania.
Well,
how did you not think this was going to end up? She seems surprised when he escapes.
Well, even better, you've got a bunch of interns and doctors in training taking notes and going, yeah, this sounds... I mean, she's the professor. This totally... There's no dissent here. This sounds great. Yeah, that's like,
and,
yes, this is a...
They're trying to help
treatment.
him. Yeah. And that type of thing is done. I mean, experimental procedures are done. It's not uncommon. It just sounds like crazy because, hey, well, that's the thing. Like, you know what? Here, going back to our gentrification type conversations, at least he's getting medical care.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, what do you think his copay is?
Free medical care.
Yeah.
It's the free medical care that gives you superpowers. So I guess
there you go. It's the So, but I mean, clearly,
I've been wondering the whole time where he gets money, because he doesn't have his wallet. He has no identification. He has no voice. He can't talk. So he can't, call the bank and be like, hey, I lost my debit card. Could you send me a new one? His office has been blown up. Where's his apartment? I don't know. You don't know how much time has passed. How long could he have possibly been floating? He's blown into the ocean or bay. I mean, it's Los Angeles, so what body of water is there? Or the river?
Yeah,
is
the riverfront.
Blown into the river. So, yeah, I can't imagine him, being, just floating around for a month.
Time has no sense in this movie because he's buried the next fucking day after the thing blows up. There's no investigation. There's no... oh, wow, it's only been 24 hours. Should we really be burying his ear?
And maybe that's why Grandma didn't come, because nobody came to his funeral. Poor guy.
Okay.
He was so worried about Grandma and making sure Grandma doesn't think he's a sinner. But, geez, Grandma...
Because it was the next day. Grandma lives in another state. She couldn't fly out in time. It's like there's...
True, so maybe she lived in Ireland.
Yeah.
True.
Liam Neeson does an unconvincing American accent. That's all I'm going to say. So
he doesn't have to be the American though.
No, I don't think it doesn't really matter. But so all this stuff that we're talking about right here though with the lab, I want to talk because early on I talked about this as a relationship with the Universal series and all this stuff with the doctor and the business of him finding this random cloak, building this new identity for himself. All of this does have a very sort of James, when I talk about this being a melodrama, this does have a very James Whale sort of quality to it. None of the way that this is acted or presented would feel out of place in a Universal monster movie. I think that is what makes this movie interesting to me. And the character itself is, you really have, even though this is nominally a superhero film, it's really presented much more like a horror film at times. And certainly the way the character looks is extreme. And the way he presents his abilities, not just the way he uses his augmented strength and everything, but like the fake skin and everything, is presented much more like a horror movie villain. It just happens to be that he's doing these things to terrible people. And I guess I wanted to know, because I know how I feel about that, and my reaction to that, this sort of freak against the world, storyline we have going on here. But I know even David said that he thought the character of Darkman was cool, but like, what is everybody thinking about this character? Not necessarily the film itself, but like once we see the fully formed Darkman character, once we've gotten through the origin portion of this, like, how does this character make you feel?
Pity is what I feel. I feel terrible for the guy because he's also trying to save burn victims. Like, oh, if we can make skin for everyone. He's just like, oh, we'll save everybody. And then he's basically having to make skin for himself because 40% of his body has been, like, destroyed. And he's in love, and that's all taken away, especially that part where he goes to her apartment and he's all in his dirty bandages, was like, ugh, it's Liam Skeezy. Like, excuse him. He's so dirty. He breaks out of the hospital and I don't know what alley he's in that's like just flooded, but he like gets to her apartment and he's like, because apparently he can't talk. I guess his vocal cords were burned or something. I'm not sure, but he scares the crap out of her, and you just feel for him. You're just like, oh, the poor guy. It's like you couldn't possibly get any more low. He's like literally sleeping in a puddle in an alley, and you just like, that feeling when you cut your finger and you have a Band-Aid on, and it, you have to like wash the dishes or wash your hands and your Band-Aid gets wet. Like, that's horrible. And that's his whole body. And I just couldn't stop thinking about that. Like, those type of things gross me out. And that type of aspect is like why I feel like this is a horror movie. And it's very like, there's a lot of these like medical horror, which, is never a good thing. Like, well, not never a good thing, but never. I'm having my wisdom teeth taken out tomorrow, so as you can imagine, all the medical stuff, and this movie definitely was like, ooh, playing on my own personal anxieties about losing that type of control over your autonomy and body. And this poor guy, he's just going nuts trying to not only like figure out a way to make himself recognizable and learn to speak again. He's also having to deal with all that post-traumatic stress of, being blown up, watching his buddy / lab assistant get brutally murdered, and he's angry. They stole his whole life from him, but good for him. He's still taking it back. And I don't mean good for him in the fact that he's going to, seek vengeance and kill everyone. But his experiments work. And he finally is able to make the skin. And, it's a shame because he's making this huge medical breakthrough. And it's like, wow, I think he's full of unlimited possibilities. And it's like, well, some are limited, but he has, it's sad because he could go back to doing what he had initially set off to do, which was help all these people who were burn victims, and instead he's just like, no, it's okay. I'm going to use this to, basically murder people.
Well, Tony, David, have anything to add to that?
I mean, I like the character because it's the kind of, I guess it probably goes to David's point, because there's all the pity part that Jamie covered, but then also he decides, you know what will be best if I really mess with these guys. Like if I really just sow discord. And that's part of what makes it the kind of almost the superhero part, right? Or anti-hero part is hey, what if I disguise myself as this guy? What if I sneak up on these people? And there's some really great bits. Like I really enjoy all of the, let me make a really convoluted plot where I portray this guy and then frame him, and and the guy that I shove through a manhole cover, because that's what I do. I mean, all that stuff is also super Raimi. Like all of the shots and crazy angles and everything like that is all the Raimi stuff that you either kind of enjoy or go, oh my gosh, this is, yep, here's Sam Raimi. But I like all of that stuff. Also, he gives us the line, take the fucking elephant, which is still like, I'm surprised that wasn't enough for you, David. Like there's this, see that whole arc where he goes from good guy to take the fucking elephant. No, I want to use that as a catchphrase, because that's just crazy.
That entire scene. I'd like to. I mean, I want to talk about that scene. There's not much I can add to what people are saying about Darkman. The character is cool, the revenge, all that stuff. I just wish it were played a little bit straighter and not in what I refuse to call melodramatic in the schlocky way. I'm duking it out with my buddy here. I'm just messing with you, Drew. But yeah, that scene, the carnival scene or whatever, it's a microcosm of what's wrong with the entire film. Tonally, it's all awry. Everything happens way too fast. Frances McDormand is like way too like overeager, and her line delivery, it may be the editing of the cut from one shot to another, or it's so task, that there's no room for lines to breathe and people's reactions. It's just frantic, and then the twisting of the comically rubber fingers, the lightning in off-kilter camera angle of him flipping his lid, and then he runs off with his face bubbling, and apparently they're like right around the corner from his lab, because she follows him and he's like running into the lab with his face all smoking, when presumably the carnival would be like blocks if not miles away, and so it's just like all of this like lack of story logic, and I can't just turn that part of my brain off. I can't enjoy.
Well, the carnival is actually the Santa Monica Pier, so it actually, if you were to think, it'd probably be like a couple miles away, if that, from where they would be in Los Angeles.
But we've seen how quickly the stuff melts, and so for him to still be smoking and stuff after running for a couple of miles with Julie running on his heels.
No, he takes his face off wherever she finds it, and she's like, "What the?" She finds it on the ground.
Which there you go. I thought maybe it was like just an extra face that he had printed or whatever. But if that's the one that was smoking and bubbling, it looked pretty intact, and it melted right about then. So he was running for God knows how long with her in tow. Or, the carnival is like in like just across the street from an abandoned series of warehouses or whatever, which seems odd. But anyway, it's just like, in other words, everything is just for the sake of the set pieces, and it's exactly what fucking Sam Raimi did in Spider-Man 3, when there's no story logic and it's just, I have these badass set pieces and I'm going to like find some way to shoehorn them together with whatever bullshit, like really crappy, middle school screenplay writing I can do in between them. I'm sorry. I'm not going to, I have very little love for Sam Raimi. His movies again and again disappoint me. From Army of Darkness all the way, there are cool things, but it's all like everything else is in service of that cool image of the badass, like thing that you could throw on a poster. And this is it's shitty storytelling. It's shitty cinema. I'm sorry. I wish I could be on the same bandwagon with you guys, but I'm not. I just do not
fine.
I mean, you don't have to be. That's the thing is, I definitely I'll defend to my last breath your ability or your right to go. I want more out of what I like. Like I want more. I like personally. I like all the things you're talking about, where like I don't know, elevated cinema or high, like all of the nice nuanced things because there's much of that. But I also find certain movies, now Spider-Man 3, maybe not, but certainly this movie, I am totally fine with set piece to set piece. Like I enjoy that. I enjoy this movie and what it does at an equal level to kind of what you're describing that you prefer as well.
Yeah.
And that's, and not every, like, you don't have to like both, that's for sure. But it works for me because sometimes I do just, I've detailed like my adventures on Tubi TV are definitely, holy crap, look at this. I can't believe I'm watching this. How did this come about? Like crazy kung fu movies, just weirdo. And a lot of that stuff is kind of, let's just throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. And some of it works and some of it ends up being abysmal. But I like, again, as long as it's not irony, because there's nothing ironic about this. As long as it's not done because, let me ape this thing and laugh at it. It's done with sincerity. As long as it's done with sincerity, I enjoy all of that. So, but yeah, I definitely see where you're like, if this is not what you enjoy and how the narrative and how Raimi tells a tale, this isn't gonna be your bag. And I'll tell you
what I did like. I'll tell you the character that he was my voice in the film, and that was Rudy Guzman. There's a point at which Rudy Guzman says to the villain, "Chinga tu madre," and I was like, yes. Someone is pressing
That's awesome.
The cri de coeur of David Bowles, man. He nailed it. I was like, yes, Rudy, you tell him. I love the scene.
Awesome.
I love the scene where Rudy and what's the name of the main villain?
Durant.
Yeah, Durant. Yeah, he says his full name every time he says his name, right, including the middle initial, which is so bizarre.
Robert G. Durant.
Robert G. Durant. And you're like, dude. But I love the scene where Durant and Guzman come to the bald guy's apartment and they're like, dude, what the fuck? Where's the money? And he's obviously been ethered and dressed up. That's just a great scene because he's like, I just woke up, and Guzman is like looking at him like, dude, we were just in the fucking restaurant together like a couple hours ago. Incredulous look in his face. That actor, what's his name? Rafael. Let me look it up. Rafael Robledo. He made it watchable for me. I was like, just this little bit character in the side.
No, he's good, man.
Not all of his line deliveries like land, but his constant, and it's so funny if you speak Spanish because he's being allowed to like just ad lib in Spanish, and his like the shit he's saying in Spanish is just it's wonderful. It's just like always like he's saying things in Spanish like, what the fuck are these guys doing, or just like always like making like really hilarious commentary on the antics, the Keystone Cop villainous antics that are going on around him. I found that, yeah.
I like that he's grounded. I like also that since he fulfills that role, like if he was a real gangster in this gang, that would be his role regardless, because none of these guys have decided to learn Spanish. Like, but despite the fact they're in LA, he's probably so used to like, if I just say what's on my mind, but in Spanish, I can get away with anything. And so he said things to Durant and a couple of other people that they're like, okay, sure. Yeah, and he just goes home like, oh man, you don't even know. Like telling his friends, like, dude, you can't imagine. I gave this guy this nickname and he likes it. And all of his friends are just like, really? Like, oh yes.
White dudes are so funny, man. I tell you.
Yeah.
What about Can we talk about how, like, even though Darkman has no pain, or I guess I assume touch sensor, like receptor, so he, I'd imagine, would not necessarily be super gentle, right? Because he's also super strong. Yet he is able to dress or undress, I should say, and redress several men throughout the course of this movie.
That's also his superpower.
Yeah, is that
very
part
gentle?
of the superpower? Super strong. It's funny. David, you'll appreciate this. When I was a kid and, Scott toilet tissues, like the toilet paper.
Yeah.
I remember thinking like, I'm going to learn Spanish. And every time I would go to a grocery store, I would like always look for the names or whatever product if they had Spanish on the back of it as well. And my parents always bought the Scott toilet tissue, and every time on the back of it would say suave, fuerte, duradero, and I would say it like that, and my mother was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, and I would just say it like I would chant it like suave, fuerte, duradero, and she thought I was actually like singing that Rico Suave song from back in the day. But she's like, well, I don't understand what you're saying, but I always thought that was like, that could be this movie because he's soft in his touch of dressing and redressing, and also his skin must be very soft because it's like butter, it melts in the sun. And he's strong, he's super strong, and he lasts long. I mean, he keeps going. He's been blown up a couple times.
So I before we get away, David, you were about to say something about a queer undercurrent. I would love to hear more about that.
Oh yes, I don't know if you guys picked up on it, but it was like as a queer man, I picked up on this right away. The notion that Ricky, the character played by Ted Raimi, is Durant's lover, or they have something. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I was like, yeah, all the bells went off. Like, yep, all right. And I just wish that had been explored a little more because that's again something you don't see very often. It's kind of cool to have the evil character and his henchman like be lovers. I thought that was fantastic. I was like, wow,
and it was completely incidental. It had nothing to do. It's just it's thrown out there very matter of factly.
Yeah, and the other gangsters know, but they're not like, oh, look at our gay leader here. They're like this all.
I know he's
probably worried about getting their fingers cut off.
Yes, or some other part of their anatomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so which makes it even more poignant when Peyton puts those the plane tickets and that sees that the bald dude is getting ready to run off with Ricky. He's like, oh fuck, you're taking my boyfriend now? Oh, your ass is out the window. So like those little things made me, that's the kind of stuff that got me through the movie. I was like, yeah, okay. Granted, I wish it had been like, that there'd been a little bit more of it and stuff like that. But like little scenes like that, it's like I was saying before we started recording, and what Jason always says is true. Like if you can find something in the film, a scene or two or something that makes it worth your while, then it's worth your while. And that's why, that's why I say I give it a C-. I'll give it an F. I got something out of the film. There were things. It wasn't like, I don't want that hour and a half back or the $13.99 I spent buying it on Amazon Prime. I mean, it was worth seeing because there were valuable things in it, and it's an interesting character. It's an interesting idea. I don't like the execution. I suspect that part of the problem is studio interference. If you read any of the stuff on IMDb or Wikipedia or just like the many articles that have been written about it, it's very clear the studio would not let this young indie punk do what he wanted to do. And I suspect that we would have had a very different film, probably one that would have been a lot more satisfying to me, because the melodrama would have been underpinned and lifted up by like a longer script and scenes that breathe more and greater character development, and that would have heightened the schlock and made it melodrama. And I'm fine with melodrama. I watch drama, which is very melodramatic.
I wonder about how I'm imagining pitching this to a studio, because I've run across this kind of attitude from publishers, and I can only imagine that it's even worse with a film studio where there's millions of dollars on the line, where you're pitching a movie where your main character, your hero, looks like Freddy Krueger. I can't imagine that went down well.
So here's something that I found interesting, and I wonder if this had I haven't read as much about this, and I don't know if it's in an article, but Dick Tracy comes out in 1990 as well.
Yep.
And I wonder if this happens a lot in studios. They go, oh, well, this will be our Batman meets Dick Tracy, because Dick Tracy's coming out and he's pitching it like, oh, it's like The Shadow. And so the studio execs go, hey, we're also going to have a thing. But then they see it and go, well, that's not what we wanted at all, because over here is like, we all know Dick Tracy. And I just wonder, and that's not outside the realm. Again, I could be totally wrong, but I could see that kind of where, we have to have a thing because this other thing's coming out. What's our thing going to be? And I wonder if this was that until they kind of saw it and went, oh, that's, I don't think, what we paid for.
Well, I mean, the movie didn't flop. It still made $40 million, like, opening.
But before even the box office comes out, you got you always have, not always, but in cases like where there is studio interference, you've got somebody somewhere who's going, well, I wanted this. And when they don't get, and they're usually bad at articulating that, for one thing. And then when they don't get that, they're just, I can't believe you gave me this thing that I didn't tell you was the thing I wanted.
This is a weird movie. This is weird in ways that even the Tim Burton Batman has some weird stuff about it, but like this is, especially in I think this is the stuff that speaks to me is somebody who's had to deal with a lot of trauma and mental illness, is like the stuff when they're dealing with, like, they kind of have flashes supposed to represent like the inside of his psyche. And I originally there was supposed to be more of that stuff, and I would love for have been more of it, but I guarantee you that's some of the stuff that the studio did not care for, because nobody, especially in 1990, no one wants to have a superhero movie that's about trauma, even though to me that's what this movie, as much as it's about revenge, this movie is about trauma to me. And like, David, like the thing you were saying about like having something to latch on to, one of the last lines in this movie, the last thing he says to the bad guy before he dispatches to him is something that I've had to repeat to myself so many times in my life when dealing with my own day-to-day just management of my condition, which is when Darkman says, I'm learning to live with a lot of things. Yeah. And I reflect on that a lot. And, to me, that is why there's a certain depth to this character that really, I'm not dismissing your criticisms. You're allowed to feel how you feel. Yeah, but no that's what speaks to me. And this is why, Tony just brought up Dick Tracy. That's why I revisit this movie. And I can't remember the last time I saw Dick Tracy, which is an incredibly stylish movie, but to me has no soul to it. And I think this movie, for what I bring to it, and maybe it's also me bringing my own life experience, which is certainly, you do bring that when you're experiencing fiction and cinema. But like that's what I bring to it, and that's what that speaks to me about it, is that sort of the sadness and trauma of it, and that's why I revisit the movie a lot. Sorry.
Well, I think what you're talking about too that was cut was, I think David's probably right in the fact that by cutting that, you underpin some of what, like, you're bringing your own perceptions to it, and so it rings true. But if you maybe don't have that, other audiences might have needed more. Like, it shows a more depth to the character and kind of a broader character. And if that's excised, well, you get a lot of Raimi, which are either there therefore not, right? So I think in this case you're kind of both right in that.
Yay! We can both be right.
I like that. It's good. It's supposed to be.
Yeah, because I mean, especially if it's cut out, then you're missing that stuff, and I think that would add a lot more to it.
Well, I mean, I would be for what it's worth, I would be there for the David Bowles penned Darkman reboot if something like that were to pass. Like I think that
they tried to make it into a TV series, right?
Yeah, I don't know how that would have worked. But this movie is very much of a time, and that is it's a good and a bad thing. Like there's some stuff about it. So Jamie was already even talking about it, particularly the way like the people of color kind of definitely played in very broad strokes, and they're all involved with organized crime. But there's cool stuff like if you're going to film a guy being flown around in the city dangling from a helicopter, you have to actually get a guy and fly him around the city hanging from a helicopter.
Right.
And that's thrilling and not something we would see now, because that would all be done with a digital stuntman.
Hey, can we talk about that for a quick second?
Absolutely.
So the helicopter scene, they spend so much time, Durant, like shooting down at Darkman, blowing up cars and all stuff like that. Why does he never just sever the fucking cable? Sever the cable. Like, I kept like screaming at you, how stupid. You're like blowing up police officers. Your face is like probably on the news.
He would, if he hadn't died, he would still have been. He would have been going to prison. It didn't matter who his friend that he was friends with, the Donald Trump of this city. He would have been going to jail for a long time because he just blew up half of downtown.
No need for. So that's one of the, to me, the logical lapses is just like the helicopter showing up in the first place is ridiculous. And then like they're like chasing, instead of like just, he's hanging on it. So set down on top of a building and fucking shoot him on top of the building. There's no reason to like fly through the city with this guy smashing into buildings. And
I'm gonna pull my Jason Henderson right here, since I am Jason Henderson tonight.
Uh-huh.
I don't care. I got to see a stuntman dangling from a helicopter, and it was real.
I was gonna say that's your problem, David. Is the fact that it is exactly what you pointed out. The idea was, what if we pulled him around a helicopter and blew everything up? And the answer is that. And, and logic be damned.
Rule of
what
cool,
we're gonna
baby.
do is run a helicopter through the city and shoot and blow up things. Ta-da!
Yeah,
we're kind of either there for that or not.
Yeah, no, I'm not. So
no, I got you.
And the whole thing is like in like, there's the kind of amusing scene where he like smashes into an office and he apologizes to people and then he's yanked out. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, yes, he's impervious to pain, but he's not impervious to having like all of his fucking bones broken. You don't.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking that too. How many times has he been shot?
Now I want to know how he deals with. So he's got a lot of exposed burns.
Yeah, infection.
Yeah, like I mean, he's a doctor. Maybe he's taking extra something. I don't know, but like, and obviously, like, and Jamie, you keep saying what did he do for money? I think he's robbing the criminals he murdered.
Yeah. I mean, clearly, he's still a thing of money. But before that, I think she's talking about between escaping from the hospital and like being in the gutter or whatever, and then going back to his lab. That astoundingly, the computers and machinery didn't work. Carting them off in his like HEB cart down to the and setting everything up, and it all works is really amazing. Rather than having scenes where he's rebuilding and soldering, they could have done all this stuff to make it. But anyway, where does he get the money?
But see, you're describing all the stuff I can't stand about Batman Begins. Like, I don't care. Like I don't need to. This is where Bruce Wayne got a Batarang. This is where the Batmobile came from. Not everything needs to be explained to death.
Those are minor things, but like but all the computers in the lab and just like that takes suspension of disbelief and like push. I mean, it takes it too far.
To David's point, the one thing that bugged me, I'm mostly okay with all the lab equipment, but he's got a monitor that has a huge hole in it and it's all burnt, and he uses that monitor a lot. And as a person who's like, for some reason I focus on that and goes, that monitor, that doesn't. No, that's not how monitors work at all. Like, they're very like those CRTs. That's
sensitive.
And I don't know why it was such a stupid thing to take me out of the scene. But seeing that monitor was what's one of the things. For like a brief few minutes, I was like, you can't view anything on that, especially not cool scientific stuff.
When he tells his lab assistant, "Why can't we figure this out? We're both smart guys." I'm like, what fucking scientist is going to say to his assistant, "We're both smart guys"? What the God? It's just a cheesy lie.
But he is. But he's a smart guy. Come on. I know. I'm just joking with you.
He is a doctor,
He's
David.
trying to be, he's positive.
Just
He's
talk to
coaching. He's trying to, build them up. He's like, hey, buddy.
I don't know. David is the only one.
Scientists speak.
David is the only one that has his camera on, and I just want to say it is
It's hilarious, right?
fun
It's
watching you shift around in your chair in disgust with the rest of us.
I also, when you say that you watch this with your cat, I also hope that from time to time, from here on out, you just turn to your cat and go, "We're both smart guys." Why are we watching this movie? We're both smart guys.
Before we we're getting close to, I think, wrapping this up, but I wanted to talk about we've talked a lot about Larry Drake, and he's fun as the guy who made no one able to look at cigars the same way again. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the actual villain, and I'm blanking on the character's name, which is terrible.
Robert E. Durant?
No, not Durant. The real estate developer. The actual
Track.
What Track? I want to know. This
Strack.
is a very
Louis Strack.
I want to know. Well, this guy is, as Tony pointed out, is kind of a stock bad guy for movies during this time period. And we have an election coming up, and I know that there's going to be a portion of our audiences are going to groan because I'm going to talk about politics here for a second. But how did we go from this, a movie where we know this guy is the bad guy, to effectively having this guy as president of the United States?
Hey, but here's the thing. It's not even that. I'll go one step further. At least this guy grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. Because that whole scene where he's like, hey, you didn't know I actually was a construction worker one time. Like, he actually got his hands dirty, and he knows how to use a nail gun enough to bolt gun, no less, to shoot at Darkman. There's no, current people we may be talking about have never touched anything remotely like work that this guy did. So at least this guy has, the whole surprise is, hey, I'm not just a suit. I grew up here. You're back in my world, actually. And that's kind of interesting, to be honest with you, because a lot of times, even the corporate guys in RoboCop are just corporate guys. They've gone through the corporate ladder. They're just evil corporate guys. This guy, the twist is, I lived on the streets. I was a construction worker. That's how I can be a supervillain and be an active supervillain. His own sort of kind of Batman who actually wears a suit. That's kind of cool. Whereas what you're talking about, it's the same thing we talked about before. How do we go from Convoy and Smokey and the Bandit to where we are now? What the hell happened? In, Working Man, Every Which Way But Loose, all these movies of 70s to mid 80s, we're not there anymore. And I don't know what happened, but that even to the point where it's people I know who grew up, who I know for a fact were like, that's right, Convoy speaks to me. These country western stars speak to me. These movies, Every Which Way But Loose, speaks to me. And now it's a crazy mirror. I still blame the Hadron Collider. I'm just gonna flat out. I think we shifted into Crazy Town. I don't know.
I'm gonna be who I always am every single time I'm on an episode with you guys. The answer is that in the 70s we hadn't had the demographic shift that we've had now, and so it was really easy when you have a white government and a white society that that has really really marginalized the few people of color that exist in it, to have the rebel rednecks be fighting against the white government that wants to tell them what to do. But when you have this huge demographic shift and the browning of the country, suddenly the rebel white guy and the fascist government team up together because they have a common enemy, and it's the brown and black people. And that's basically all it is. It's ugly. It's horrible. It's sad that many of our friends and family members fall into that category, but ultimately that's what it is. You don't embrace fascism unless it's because you're afraid of something, and what they're afraid of is losing, their hegemony, white hegemony in this country, and that's what it boils down to. And it doesn't require a lot of fun. One last thing that I want to ask: why does Dartman blow up his lab There's no need.
Yeah, I said the same
One
thing.
guy, he blows up his lab, and then
because he's
and then,
that might be filed under the emotional stuff going on in his mind. It seems like
Or
it
he
makes
doesn't.
then he has Bruce Campbell's face at the end. So where does he get his new equipment? I guess maybe when we weren't
I said
looking,
the same
he
thing.
set up a separate lab with the money that he stole from Strack, and we just don't see it. And so whatever. Okay.
well
That's
if you didn't like this movie, I would not recommend watching the 2 sequels, which I don't even like.
I mean, that
Oh,
there's I can say I don't. I think I've seen 2, and I might have seen 3 like on cable.
They are not good.
But I don't remember. I think it was because I saw 2 and went, no, I think I'm skipping 3. I think I'm fine.
Yeah. There's a reason why Liam Neeson did not come back. But
who takes his place?
Arnold Maslow, the mummy himself.
Oh, the mummy. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the mummy, he was pre-gaming being the mummy, being Darkman.
Right.
Got his bandage practice in. So I again, why I am doing this movie, just real quick, and then we're gonna get into final thoughts. I would not be doing what I'm doing now in part because of this movie. So thank you to everybody for whatever you thought about this film. Thank you for taking part in this discussion. I really, I know everybody's busy, so it meant a lot to me that people took time out of their week to join in on this. And I
will say this before I say my final thoughts. Dartman's a cool character, and if this film inspired Halloween Man, then this film deserves to exist because Halloween Man is fucking awesome. And so I'm glad that we got to spend some time talking about one of the elements of inspiration for your really, really memorable character and really, really awesome comic series. So I think it's true that we do that, right? There are plenty of things that I can't go back to from my childhood, like books that I can't read anymore, but from which I still, mine them for ideas for things that I'm working on, because there are bits and pieces that matter to me still that are like kind of fused with who I am, even if I can't enjoy those bits of media anymore. And so I think it was a great conversation. I appreciate your willingness to have a conversation with people with a person who has a radically different view of it than you. And I thought it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. So on that note, I guess we are going to do final thoughts. So Jamie, David, Tony, and then myself, and then we'll come back around for the good old endorsements, and then I'll hang up my Jason Henderson impression for the time being. So Jamie, final thoughts, Darkman.
Well, for what David just said, I have to say I second that notion. It is, I felt like I really understood Halloween Man a lot more when I saw Darkman. So it's kind of funny to kind of recognize that development in your characters, and see that inspiration, not in a lot of different ways. Like I think of the cemetery scene, and when he comes back from everyone thinking he's dead, and he surprises Frances McDermott while she's at the cemetery, just like, hey, I'm back. And she's like, oh, really? Like, are you a ghost? And like, are you alive right now? This is a strange way to, reintroduce yourself.
The only way it would have been better is if he'd popped out of the grave and if Sam Raimi off-kilter angle, like, I'm Liam Neeson's. That would have been amazing.
Hey, honey. Are you still willing to marry me?
It really made me think of Super Deformed.
Marry me.
And for those of you who don't know, the Halloween Man Super Deformed issue is kind of the beginning of it all. Gets you started on the story, but there's that scene is very much like it just reminds me of like the beginnings of Halloween Man. That specifically that one scene, not the stuff with his face being gone or anything like that. It's specifically that like scene because of the love story, I guess, and the relationship. And I find that even though I know they're kind of just like stuck together, it's not Frances McDermott's finest hour, but good for her for being a non-traditional female lead in this, like female romantic lead. And it's something that she herself had even said, that she didn't see herself as, a traditionally like sexy woman. And, it's that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And because everyone in this movie sees her in that way, I think it makes their love story more like believable. There seems to be more chemistry, and I think that's kind of like the driving force for me, is seeing that, like, will they, like, are they, how is this going to work? And I really thought that they would like stay together at the end, and then he runs off. And it's very Phantom of the Opera, and that like it can't work. He's taken it too far, and like it's just not going to be what it's not going to be the happy ending that you're hoping for. And I don't know, I'm a sucker for sad movies. So this is like a sad action movie, slash horror. So, but yeah, again, I think it's something that you may not appreciate on the first watch, but definitely by the second, you'll get more of a kick out of it.
Well, that was, first of all, great, and thank you. And David, follow that.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough, right? No, yeah. Again, it was interesting to revisit the film. I definitely think that as Liam Neeson's first foray into action film, that before this point he was like not known as an action star or whatever, except for like a little bit piece in Excalibur. I think it's really important to watch as the part of the evolution of Sam Raimi's superhero style. I mean, obviously he's going to be directing the next Doctor Strange film, so it is interesting to see all of those those things, like his evolution from the Evil Dead films into the kind of superhero films he'll eventually make with Spider-Man. I think it is an interesting, if you're a completist and you really want to get a feel for how superhero movies just in general evolved from the 80s up into the 2000s. This is, obviously an essential film to watch. There are, I think it's problematic. I think it is an indication of the reason that like Marvel is so successful right now is that the studio is working with writers and directors together and not interfering, but shepherding it and bringing in people who understand superhero storytelling in a way that clearly was not the case with this film. Universal, I think it's clear, has its fingerprints all over it. And I just wish, I'm sure all those elements have been lost, and I'm sure that Sam Raimi probably has no interest in it, but I would have loved to see, like the director's extended cut or whatever, of this film, to see, the things that were left on the editing room floor. I bet they would have added to my enjoyment of the film. So yeah, it's not a film I'm going to totally pan, but it's one of those films that, because I could see a version of the film that would have really, really like resonated for me, like there in the interstices of the film that I was watching, I found it frustrating. When that's not there at all, when it's just like a straight up, Treehawk, kind of like over the top, insane film like the one y'all reviewed a couple weeks ago, with Chow Yun-fat in it. What was the film that you guys were talking about?
Geez, Tony, what
Seventh
was that?
Curse?
Yes, like a film like that. It's like the just totally like wall to wall insanity and just like reveling in it. But I don't expect anything other than that from that kind of a film, and so I enjoy that. And there's also something about like it being in another language and so forth that makes it a little more palatable to me. And so I think that's what, for me personally, like kept me from enjoying it, was just that I could see another film that would have like that I wanted to see, and it wasn't there, and that's always disappointing to me. So, but if you go into it without those kinds of expectations, I bet you'll get a lot more out of it. So, definitely, if you're into superhero films and you want to understand how they got to be where they are, you kind of have to see Darkman. If you haven't already, check it out.
Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I've enjoyed this since I saw it on VHS. I have fun with it. I really like, even though sometimes it's self-indulgent, the Raimi-ness of it. He's just going to do things that a lot of other directors, and sometimes he gets aped. It's rarely successful for some reason. I don't know, because he's also riffing on things, certain things that he grew up with. Especially Stooges, etc. Like I still I know it's maligned, but I still enjoy from time to time going back to Crime Wave, even though, some people like it, some people don't. But I enjoy all that stuff. I think it's got a lot of great bits. The villains are great. What Jamie was talking about having a really competent lead. She's really awesome. Like she's successful in her business. She doesn't need to be saved she's saved in a way that also Darkman needs to be saved. Like there's crazy criminals. She's not part of, when you watch a lot of the serials, the women are almost always in distress and they're pretty helpless. She's not that at all. In fact, in some ways, she's more successful than him at the beginning, because she's actually doing all of her stuff and is like, hey, I got my career. You go play with your skin stuff, and hopefully you'll do that. But they have a good relationship. I think all of that's really great. There's also, we point out there's a few forward-looking things that maybe the 90s weren't the place, or 1990 itself wasn't the place to expand on that. But it was in there, and I think that's really cool and fascinating on a rewatch. So I really do enjoy the movie. I'm gonna echo again that if this led us to Halloween Man, regardless of how much I enjoy it, I double enjoy it now, because that took us to where we are now. That's really awesome. I have a blast. I'll watch this movie anytime somebody's like, hey, you want to watch Darkman? The answer is yes, because I'm a sucker for, again, like you brought up the Seventh Curse. That's, in as much as I like weighty, really poignant film, I can turn on a dime and watch something like this or Seventh Curse and also be in the same kind of cinematic joy, in a different way, of course, because you need to be in the right mood for each. But I like each in equal measure. You know what? I will say though, lately, given the weight of the world, I have leaned more towards Darkman and less towards Heavy. So
in Darkman, the Donald Trump stand gets thrown off the side of a construction site. So I'm sorry, was that too political? But yeah,
one can only dream. Where's Darkman? Where are you, sir?
Yeah, Darkman, where are you now? Our late nation throws its lonely face to you, or I'm butchering that. Anyway, so I obviously, this movie was an influence on me. It's not one I think I've given enough lip service, which is why I decided to devote an entire episode of the show to it. I think there's a lot of stuff that we could have unpacked and didn't, but then we'll end up with like a 3-hour long podcast on Darkman, and I don't think anybody would benefit from that.
Very disapproving. He would have looked at you very disapprovingly.
Yes.
He's MP3 doing sitting on my MP4.
I want to say, as far as that influence on my character, the primary difference, and I'm coming away with, I think I'm going back to that line that I talked to, because I think that what this movie is about, when I go back to it, which is the line, I'm learning to live with a lot of things. I think the thing that separates Darkman from Halloween Man, ultimately is, at the very movie, he does not go off. He decides that he cannot attempt to rebuild his life, whereas Halloween Man does try to continue to have a life. And I think that therein lies the difference, and it's an important difference. So even though this character in this film inspired me, I have gone off in my own direction. But I do love this movie, and I think if you like Universal monster films, if you like movie series, if you like Sam Raimi, you need to have seen this movie. And it's, even though it's an action movie, I think this is a good time of year to watch it, because it does have strong, with all of his business with masks and cloaks and all this stuff, it does have a certain gothic quality to it that sits well during the Halloween season. So it's a good time to fire it up. And on that note, we're going to go back around to for endorsements. So Jamie, do you have anything to endorse this week?
Yeah, I've been watching Evil, with actually, I'm blanking on the names of everyone in the cast. With Luke Cage, and I don't know any other name of the actors on the show, but it's kind of like a
The dude from Lost.
Sons of the Lambs. I say Sons of it because the lead is a very Jodie Fisher-esque type.
Jodie Foster, you mean?
Like, I said Jodie Foster. I don't know why I said Jodie Fisher. I'm like, who is Jodie Fisher? But Jodie Foster in Sons of the Lambs. But then, they're paired together X-Files style. She's the cynic. She's partnered with, I always call him Luke Cage, the actor who plays Luke Cage, and he plays an aspiring priest. And then there's the third guy who plays the marvelous Mr. Ben.
Mike Coulter
Muslim.
Is his name.
Oh, okay. And it's where they are basically hired by the Catholic Church to investigate different paranormal activities and make sure people are should they be deemed worthy of an exorcism, or there's one where it's about a prophet. Is this woman a prophet or a false prophet? So there's a lot of biblical references, but it's very supernatural, but it's kind of, I don't know, it reminds me of like Law and Order / Sons of the Lambs / X-Files / oh gosh, what was the other thing? But it has that feel to it. So it's been very entertaining so far. And there's been a couple episodes where I was like genuinely scared. This one where like the earworm song, it's particularly scary. Yeah, it really is. It's very unnerving. It's like where children start like literally stabbing themselves in their ears because of like a song that's being played and they can't stop singing it, and it's just so disturbing. But it's actually, like I said, it's definitely like it took a few episodes, but it found its footing, and then now I'm like, I can't wait to watch the next episode. But there's only one season, so I'm like,
Yeah, I watched it when it came out on CBS. It's really great, and it ends really, really, really cool. So I can't wait for another season.
Well, David, do you have any? It sounds like you're kind of also endorsing Evil, but
I second her endorsement, and then I've been watching just a bunch of Korean stuff, and so there's this great film called The Mimic that's on Amazon Prime that I really recommend, about a couple who has like lost their son, he's not dead, he like just went missing one day in the city, and they've been searching for him for years and they can't find him, and now they've moved with their younger daughter to like a remote like village, and weird things start happening, and a new child shows up in their life, and it is just a harrowing movie. It's really, really good. And then I also watched Ju-on Origins on Netflix, which is kind of like a reboot of the Grudge, the original Japanese Grudge films, with the kind of, I guess the conceit is that those were like filmic interpretations of something that really happened, and this 6-episode show, the episode only 30 minutes long, you can like watch it in an afternoon, is like the real story, and it is brutal. So it's like a lot heavier than Darkman, for example. It is a brutal, heavy Japanese horror thing that just blew my mind and kept me from sleeping. So it's good. I also am watching, so I finished watching that, and I'm almost done with Strangers from Hell, this kind of about this young Korean guy just out of the university and the military who's working as an intern, and he has to stay at this like little crappy like residence, renting a little room, and like everybody on his floor is a fucking psychopath. It's really, I mean, like literally they're like serial killers. It's so good and so bizarre. And I just finished The Flower of Evil, which is like a South Korean, I thought it was going to be like Dexter, but it has like this really interesting twist. But it's basically, a female cop who's married to this like wonderful, apparently like wonderful guy, and they have a kid together, and he's loving and attentive and so forth. But he's a sociopath, and his father was a serial killer, and it's like how all of it unravels. It's really, really good. I just finished it yesterday and was just blown away. So yeah, those are some great Korean movies and TV shows if you're in the creepy horror slasher kind of mood.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know how we missed all this before, but whatever's in the water in Korea is making awesome directors and awesome filmmakers, awesome creators.
God,
we're just now being exposed to it, and whatever's going on there, everybody else kind of turn your head and go, okay, let's look into this.
Yeah, K-horror is like, it's the thing right now. I mean, it is really, really good. At least it fits very, very nicely in my wheelhouse. I enjoy it, and it's I think that Korea's just like dominating entertainment right now. It's just, you're right. There is something's going on down there. I don't know what exactly it is.
I would imagine it would be being right next door to a totalitarian I cannot talk right, a regime, a dictatorship.
Well, I mean,
we may be living in one.
Sure that's private, yeah.
Fair enough.
No, I mean, yeah, it's having a lot of stuff come through Fantastic Fest and kind of seeing it early on as far as festivals. It's more mass media, and so seeing it kind of trickle in and then just the floodgates open has been fascinating.
I bet.
David, have you seen I Saw the Devil?
Yes. Oh my God, it's a great film.
But all seeing that kind of come through and then all of a sudden just like, whoa. All of these, because it's getting more popular, all these directors, writers, creators are getting stuff in front of you. Like The Kingdom is also really great.
The Kingdom is incredible.
So yeah, I welcome this new floodgate of cool stuff. If you're willing to read subtitles, you have a lot of stuff to catch up on. It's great.
Oh yeah! Oh my God. Did you see The Wailing?
No, that one looked really dark, and I was like, I want to see it. Like I said, I'll be honest with you, my viewing has definitely, I'm not saying I don't watch darker movies, and I'm on a horror movie podcast, but the deeper, darker, seedier, more realistic side of horror, over the past year, I've watched a lot less of that. Let's put it that way. I have to be in a certain realm to view that, and it kind of sucks because I've heard about some really good things that sound fascinating and exactly like they're really, really good movies. And I feel kind of bad because I want to give those artists their due and view their work and engage with their work. But there's a huge part of me that's just not quite ready to do that, to be honest with you.
Did I hear you 100%?
In fact, when you said, "Oh, I endorse," you and James were like, "I endorse evil." I'm like, "So you've been watching the news?" I just turn on the news. Like, yeah, I also watch that from time to time.
You're endorsing evil, and
I try to limit the amount of news I watch. So it's one endorsement. But for me, I got a couple things. One is more personal, and one is I noticed the other day. I know I've talked about it a lot, but I noticed Archive by Gavin Rothery. It's not just because I did the interview, but also because it is one of my favorite sci-fi pieces from this year. I think it's beautifully shot. I think there's a lot of meat to it, especially on a rewatch. Is on Prime. You don't have to pay, like it's not on VOD. It's on Prime. If you have a subscription, you can watch Archive right now. And I think there's a lot there. And I know, he worked on Moon as an artist, and seeing his first directorial debut, and it's as strong as this. This is a person that was cool, really cool to interview and really awesome, but also has a real interesting vision. And I'm kind of looking forward to what else he does, because I think it's really cool. So the fact I was thumbing through Prime was like, oh, look, anybody who has Prime can watch Archive. Like, there's no reason to not watch it now if you have that service. So, which most people, I think, if you watch, if you're tuning into this, we do a lot of our stuff through Prime. So the other thing is, kind of on a more personal note, I had somebody really close to me pass away, and it got me thinking. Like, I started going through as an aunt who really shaped a lot of who I am, and a lot of my persona that comes across possibly on the podcast, and was always, but one of the things she did was that she was super supportive of was giving me books. And growing up where I grew up, where I grew up and kind of how things were, I escaped into books a lot. It became a huge part of the person I am. And there's a lot going on now. The world's, is what it is. But it made me think a lot in her passing. And it's a shame that a lot of times we don't think of these things until we lose someone. And that's its own kind of terrible reality. I want to endorse, if you can, if it's somebody close to you, and it can be a friend, a good friend, it can be a relative, a good coworker, whatever. Let's give out more books. And I'm not even talking about, doesn't have to be a novel. It can be a graphic novel, it can be a comic, something that people enjoy that is, even if it's nonfiction, takes you somewhere or is knowledge that you find interesting, anything like that. And personalize that, sign it, hey, thought you might dig this or something. Because now I still have a lot of these books. Some of them are children's books, some of them, on into adulthood. And those memories of this person who shaped a lot of, especially my early years, are like right on my shelf. Like I can pick that book up and have those feelings and look at this book played or this, what was signed to me. And that becomes a part of that. It lives on way longer than kind of the frailty of humanity. Somebody can find this book years later and know that someone passed it on to somebody else they love. And in a crazy place that we are, I just want to advocate, more stuff like that. It could be music. I mean, I also think about that. For me, it was for our relationship, it was books. But giving cool music to somebody and sharing that, whatever that entertaining thing could be, movies, which we discussed. Share more good things like that. Share, to me, like sharing that physical media and having it there just around throughout all these years, it really, really meant something. So I'm advocating, that kind of giving and that kind of, let's all take each other on adventures. And those kind of things can possibly outlive us, which, that's what we have. So I know that's kind of rambly, but that's where my head has been over the past couple of days.
That's nice, Tony.
Yeah, Tony, that was terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you for opening up like that, first of all. And your honesty a lot on the show is very inspiring, and your the willingness to be open like that with your emotion, I think is just wonderful. So
thanks.
Thank
I'm
you.
honest to a fault. I mean, that's it can be a double-edged sword, but that's just me. So
Yeah.
I do appreciate that.
Yeah, be. You can only be who you are, unless you're Darkman, in which case you can be people. So as far as endorsements on my own part, Darkman was kind of accidentally about gentrification. I'm going to endorse a movie that was about gentrification on purpose. I'm talking about Vampires versus the Bronx, which is a new all ages horror film on Netflix that just came out this month. It's about a group of kids in the Bronx who uncover a plot by some vampires to overtake their town, or not overtake their town, over neighborhood. And it's not perfect. Like it like the final scene doesn't completely work as well as it should, but it's got a lot of heart. And if you're a fan of like Monster Squad, for example, I think you'll really like this. It's got a lot of that.
Attack the Block.
Or Attack the Block. It's got a lot of Attack the Block in it.
Okay.
And
I didn't see that then.
It's really fun. And the kids are hilarious, and it's a great Halloween time viewing. And I just had such a good time watching it. It's the sort of movie that you could watch, and even though it wasn't perfect, I could go back and watch it again, like immediately after being done watching it, and have no regrets, because it just was pleasant to spend time watching it.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a really fun movie. I also, again, the whole reason why we had this episode, it's the 20th anniversary of Halloween Man. Just yesterday on Comixology, Halloween Man number 25, Halloween Man 20th anniversary issue, aka Beyond October. It's out. You have you one job, people, internet land. It's to go to Comixology, buy this comic, read this comic, and enjoy this comic. in the full festive glow of the Halloween season. Yes, and I am just so excited to finally be able to share it with people, because I worked harder on that than I think just about any comic that I've ever worked on, and that's actually saying a lot because I've been doing it for 20 years. So I am just happier than a pig in shit to share it with everybody. So,
you are that is the most sexist thing I've ever heard you say.
I know. I was like, ew, Drew. Like, that's gross. Like,
I'm happier than
just
a dark
like
man
Tony,
at the carnival.
I would rather like happier than like a fat kid with cake. Like that's better than.
I ain't gonna fat shame.
Everybody in Comixology.
I'm a fat kid.
Everybody go to Comixology and take the fucking elephant.
Oh, dude!
Yeah.
Take the fucking elephants. Yes.
And go out and vote. Don't forget to vote.
Go vote. It's early voting in Texas. Yes.
Smack out of office.
Yes. Help Darkman throw him from the metaphorical building. Is the United States of America right
grab
now.
him by the ballot.
Yes. Unless, of course, you're going to go vote for Trump, in which case, don't vote.
Yeah, stay at home. Yeah,
stay at home. Yeah,
I know there's some ballot boxes in California. You can totally put your vote into there.
Yeah. On that note, thanks one and all for taking part in our discussion of Darkman. We will be back on Sunday with our special guests Monster Movie Happy Hour, when we will be discussing The Mummy, the original from Universal Studios, starring Boris motherfucking Karloff. And I can't wait for that one as well. We've had a lot of cool movies that we've been talking about this month. So, but just in case this is the last episode to listen to between here and now, happy Halloween, everyone. And I'm definitely saying happy Halloween to David, because I don't know when I will talk to him mano y mano like that yet. So, it was great spending time with you. Even we had our disagreements, although I think that makes the show better. So I was okay with that.
Yeah, David always classes the joint up. So it's good. It's good to have him on.
Thanks, Jamie, Drew, and Tony. It's been lovely hanging out with you.
Yeah, it's been great to chat with you guys.
Sometime in the next few months, you'll need me again. My services are always readily available, always at your disposal. Okay?
Awesome. All right.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Good night.